The classroom hummed with energy, a massive domed chamber filled with the soft glow of floating knowledge orbs. Holographic charts of exotic species rotated slowly above the heads of the students. Each student, alien or otherwise, sat in assigned paths that floated just inches off the floor, arranged in concentric circles around the central teaching platform. Jake sat on the outermost ring, clutching his, with sweaty palms, the only human in a sea of diverse beings. To his left, a Christian student emitted soft musical chimes whenever it was excited. To his right, a fairy creature with 3 eyes and too many fingers twitched nervously. Jake did his best not to fidget, though his heart pounded in his chest. The atmosphere shifted as a deep hum vibrated through the air. In the center, a beam of pale green light formed and slowly solidified into the imposing figure of Professor Dr. Towering at least 3 meters tall, his 4 eyes blinking in slow rhythm. His voice echoed through the chamber, enhanced by gentle translation fields. Class Satra, Zeta, your final challenge has been reviewed and approved by the Grand Academic Council. The air crackled with anticipation. Jake swallowed. He hadn't been entirely sure what the final challenge would be. He was hoping for a research paper, or maybe a presentation. Professor continued, you will each, either solo or in teams, journey to the moon of, and capture a living specimen of a beast. The chamber went dead silent. The words hung in the air like a thin cloud. Jake blinked. He wasn't sure he had heard that right. Around him, alien students began exchanging glances, some in fear, others steeling themselves with determination. Jake hesitantly raised his hand. Professor eyes locked on him. Yes, Mr. Jake Harrison of Earth. Jake cleared his throat, his voice cracking just slightly. Professor, did you say capture? As in, live capture. There were murmurs, some laughter. Professor, 4 eyes blinked out of sync, which Jake had come to learn meant patience wearing thin. Correct. A live specimen. The purpose is to test your adaptability and negotiation skills. Jake blinked again. Negotiation skills? With a creature known across 5-star systems as the night terror of the jungle. He forced a shaky smile. Of course, sir. Great. Love a good challenge. The professor extended one of his many appendages, and a massive hologram appeared above them, showing a swirling mass of tangled jungle and misty skies. Red text labeled certain areas, known nesting grounds, high danger zones, and ominously, less known student fatalities. Jake shrank a little in his seat. Professor was softened but carried weight. Remember, success does not mean brute force. Da is not merely a beast, it is an intelligent creature. Approach with respect, not arrogance. Jake exhaled slowly, his mind already spiraling. Capture a colossal jungle predator. No big deal. He glanced at his alien classmates. Teams were already forming. Groups of 4 or 5 exchanging nods and strategizing. He awkwardly attempted to make eye contact with a few friendly faces, but most looked away. Humans were still considered the new kids in the galaxy. Jake wasn't just the only human here. He was the test case. He buried his head in his hands for a second, then pulled up his, and frantically began reviewing any and all available information on the thick black scales, 2 tails, massive jaws, retractable spines along its back, and an unparalleled sense of smell. Great. He scrolled further. Not aggressive unless threatened. Highly territorial. Loved nesting in dense jungles with swampy areas. Sensitive to temperature changes. And what was this? A small footnote, reported attraction to strong and familiar scents. Hypothesis, behavior. He could work with that. Maybe. The class began to disband, floating paths moving toward exit chutes along the walls. Jake hesitated until he was the last one sitting. Professor turned his gaze toward him one final time. Mr. Harrison, the professor said, softer now. You are aware you may partner with others. Jake shrugged. Yeah, well, most of them think I'm more likely to become lunch than to deliver one. Mandibles twitched in something that almost resembled amusement. Sometimes, unexpected methods yield the greatest results. Jake nodded faintly. I'll do my best not to die. That's usually my strategy. He stood, legs shaking slightly, and made his way toward the exit. As he passed the threshold, the lights dimmed behind him, and the weight of the assignment settled fully on his shoulders. Jake's ship shuddered as it broke through the thick atmosphere of. The controls were sticky, and the landing wasn't exactly smooth, but he managed to avoid smashing into the dense jungle canopy. Outside, the towering trees twisted upward, their trunks glowing faintly with bioluminescence, and thick vines pulsed like living arteries. Every sound from the planet seemed exaggerated. Distant roars, shrill insect chirps, and the low hum of strange energy fields radiating from beneath the foliage. He wiped sweat from his brow, half from the tropical humidity and half from the knowledge that something out there could swallow him whole. He grabbed his pack and slung it over his shoulder, the items he'd brought. Scent canisters from Earth's most pungent spices, Professor mention of strong scents stuck with him, an ultrasonic communicator, a tranquilizer dart gun with adjustable strength, he really hoped he wouldn't need it, a collapsible net, and, perhaps most importantly, a bag of beef jerky. He wasn't sure if the would appreciate Earth snacks, but he figured it couldn't hit. The hatch hissed open, and the humid air hit him like a wall. He stepped cautiously onto the mossy ground, the weight of silence heavy despite the strange symphony of alien life. Every crunch and foot echoed in his skull. His beeped, displaying a holographic map, nesting grounds about 4 kilometers east. He took a deep breath and started moving. The jungle was more alive than he had imagined. Strange flowers hissed when he brushed too close, vines recalled and pulsed as if breathing, and creatures with translucent wings hovered, inspecting him with very curiosity. Once, he thought he saw eyes peering out from behind a large root, but they vanished before he could be sure. He pressed forward, heart pounding. After an hour of careful trekking, he reached a small clearing. The ground was churned, claw marks gouged into the mud. His pinged, signs of recent activity. He crouched, examining the marks. The spacing of the claws and the depth of the grooves confirmed it. Territory. He whispered to himself, "Okay, Jake, time to make either the worst or best decision of your life." He retrieved the scent canister marked Experimenta Blend 10, a combination of durian, concentrated garlic, and a hint of cinnamon, and activated it, releasing plumes of swirling, colorful vapor. The air around him shifted immediately. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. He set the canister on a small rock and retreated to the edge of the clearing. The minutes stretched long, the jungle deathly still. Then came the sound. A low rumble, like distant thunder. Branches cracked. Leaves rustled violently. His heart leapt into his throat. From between massive roots, the emerged. It was bigger than he'd feared. Easily 6 meters long, its scales shimmered with iridescent hues, shifting between midnight blue and emerald green. Its eyes locked onto the swirling scent cloud, nostrils flaring. 2 tails swayed behind it, ending in barbed tips. Jake knew better than to run. He stayed crouched, lowering his gaze without turning away. He'd read that showing fear or challenge could trigger aggression. The crept forward, massive claws digging into the soil. It circled the scent canister, snorting and huffing. Then, something astonishing happened. It sneezed. A massive, almost comedic sneeze. The vapor apparently tickled more than enticed. The shook its head violently, and Jake couldn't help but chuckle nervously. The beast's gaze flicked toward him. He froze, swallowing hard. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his bag and pulled out the beef jerky. He held the packet up. "You wanna try Earth cuisine? It's a smoky." He tossed a strip gently onto the ground between them. The inched forward, sniffed, and to Jake's utter disbelief, licked it up with a massive tongue. A low rumble followed, not aggressive, more like a feline purr. Encouraged, Jake tossed another piece. That took it, then sat on its haunches, tilting its massive head. "Well," Jake whispered, "you're not so bad." He slowly activated the ultrasonic communicator. The device emitted soothing frequencies known to calm large predators. The blinked slowly, seeming even more at ease. Jake's mind raced. He had expected a better. Instead, he found himself feeding snacks to a galactic nightmare beast like it was a curious puppy. With shaking hands, he pulled out the collapsible net and unfurled it, not to trap, but to offer. He laid it on the ground like a mat, gesturing for the creature to sit. To his amazement, it did. Jake carefully attached the net's harness latches, creating a loose but comfortable restraint system designed to transport large life forms gently. Okay, big guy or girl, ready for a ride? Thou made a soft, thrilling sound, almost like amusement. Jake activated the beacon to summon the retrieval ship, still half in disbelief that this was actually working. He sat down beside the beast, breathless and laughing to himself. The retrieval ship hovered above the dense jungle canopy, its stabilizers humming softly as the beams slowly lifted both Jake and the docile into the open cargo bay. Jake sat beside the enormous creature, gently scratching behind one of its shimmering frilled ears, still amazed by how the universe had taken his panic and turned it into one of the weirdest bonding experiences of his life. As they settled into the bay, the ship's hatch hissed shut and the vessel began its smooth ascent into a orbit. Jake exhaled slowly, trying to calm the adrenaline still pulsing through his veins. He glanced at the creature, who let out another deep, purring trill, resting its enormous head in his lap. He couldn't help but laugh softly. Moments later, the ship's calm crackled, and Professor Stern, gravely filled the cabin. Cadet Jacobs, confirm. You have the specimen aboard. Jake tapped the console. Yes sir. The is secure. And friendly. Surprisingly friendly. There was silence on the other end, followed by a low grumble. Friendly. The professor sounded as if that word had never existed in his vocabulary. Do not lower your guard. They are apex predators. One misstep, Jake cut him off. Professor, with all due respect, this one seems more interested in snacks and naps than ripping my arms off. The professor muttered something in his native language that sounded suspiciously like swearing, then finally said, proceed to research station data. No. We will meet there. As the ship broke atmosphere and the vast expanse of space unfolded before them, Jake couldn't help but stare out at the stars in awe. His heart still hammered, but a warm pride had begun to settle in his chest. He'd done it. He caught a space monster. Without violence, without chaos, just curiosity and a lot of improvised charm. They docked with data, now an hour later. The massive orbiter station loomed in the void, its multiple rings spinning lazily, with hangar bays bustling with traffic from dozens of alien species. As Jake guided through the cargo ramp, stand technicians, guards, and scientists froze. Conversations halted. Even the security personnel lowered their weapons slightly, eyes wide with disbelief. Following a human cadet like an overgrown, was not something they saw in their training manuals. Jake cleared his throat. I brought the monster. The silence broke into hushed murmurs as Professor arrived, his long, spined tail flicking with irritation. His three eyes blinked slowly in sequence as he took in the scene. Cadet Jacobs, he rumbled, was deep enough to reverberate through the deck plating. You are either the luckiest human in recorded galactic history, or the most foolish. Jake smiled sheepishly. Can't it be both? Approached who tilted its head and gave a soft snort, then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, licked the professor's scale cheek. Recalled slightly, blinking in shock. His assistants barely contained laughter behind their data pads. Jake spoke up quickly. Turns out, they respond well to kindness. And beef jerky. He offered the professor the empty packet as proof. Gaze turned back to Jake, now less disapproving and more bewildered. And you are certain this pacification will hold? Jake crouched beside and gave it another scratch and then the frill. The massive creature closed its eyes, emitting that deep, soothing trill again. I think, Jake said, This one was just tired of being hunted and treated like a threat. Maybe all it needed was someone not trying to shoot it. The professor's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. Perhaps there is more potential in you than I initially calculated. He gestured for the scientific team to move in. Carefully, they approached with scanners and equipment. They allowed them to work, occasionally blinking or lazily shifting position but never showing aggression. As the examination continued, placed a heavy hand on Jake's shoulder. You have defied expectations today, cadet. This may change our understanding of the species entirely. Jake looked at the enormous creature, who now had several alien scientists cooing over it as though it were a new pet. He chuckled softly. Just promise me one thing, Professor. Eyes narrowed. And what is that? Next time, Jake said, grinning, when you tell me to catch a space monster, can I get hazard P? The professor snorted in amusement. We shall discuss your compensation. As the chaos of research and analysis unfolded around him, Jake leaned against the cargo bay wall, watching the beast doze contentedly, surrounded by fascinated minds from across the galaxy. He realized with a grin that not only had he survived the impossible assignment, he'd made a friend. The laboratory chamber was abuzz with activity. Alien scientists of every species imaginable hovered around the massive containment field, where the now rested on a platform covered in soft material, occasionally blinking at the curious researchers. The gentle pulse of scanners hummed, and colorful data streams projected across translucent screens. Jake stood just outside the field, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of pride and disbelief. He was still trying to process the fact that not only had he survived, he'd somehow become part of something much bigger. Professor approached, his expression unusually thoughtful. Cadet Jacobs, he said, you have forced me to reconsider several assumptions. This creature's behavior defies centuries of documentation. Jake raised an eyebrow. Maybe your documentation was missing snacks and patience. Gave a rare smile, faint but genuine. Perhaps. One of the Christian researchers, a being of refracted light and geometric forms, floated over and emitted a soft chiming sound that translated into speech through the lab's interpreter. Cadet Jacobs, would you join us? The seems calmest in your presence. Jake blinked. You want me inside the containment field? Nodded. We have determined it poses no threat. Your presence may help us communicate. Jake hesitated only briefly before stepping forward. The energy barrier shimmered and parted for him like a curtain. He entered slowly, feeling every eye in the room on him. The lifted its head, rumbling softly in greeting. Jake crouched next to it, giving it another reassuring scratch behind its frill. Hey, big guy, he murmured. The creature blinked slowly, then nudged him gently with its snout, nearly knocking him over. Laughter rippled through the lab, a rare moment of shared levity between species. The Christian scientist began to emit soft pulses of light, attempting direct communication. To everyone's surprise, they responded, not with aggression, but with a series of low, resonant vibrations that translated into simple concepts: curiosity, trust, safety. The lab fell silent as the realization dawned. This wasn't just a wild beast, it was intelligent. Perhaps not in the way most sentient species measured intelligence, but clearly capable of understanding and expressing complex emotion. Jake looked up at the professor. You're not dealing with a monster. You're dealing with someone who's just never been given a chance to be understood. Gaze softened. I see that now. The Christian being pulsed another query. Why trust the human? The response was slow, deliberate, and echoed through the translator. He did not fear me. He fed me. He listened. Gasps filled the room. Centuries of assumption shattered in that single moment. Stepped forward. Cadet Jacobs, I believe you have done more today than capture a specimen. You have brokered the beginning of understanding between our species and a creature once thought untamable. Jake felt a wave of emotion surge through him. He hadn't just survived an impossible assignment, he'd changed the narrative. The chamber doors opened, and representatives from several allied species entered, their expressions a mixture of awe and excitement. One of them, a tall, elegant being with feathered crests and luminescent markings, spoke softly. "We came to observe, and perhaps to congratulate." Inclined his head. "Our cadet has achieved what none of us thought possible." Jake turned toward the delegation, still slightly overwhelmed. "Honestly, I just didn't want to get eaten." The feathered diplomat's crest rippled with amusement. "And yet you gave the universe something far greater." As the delegation observed the creature more closely, the shifted its weight and let out a low, harmonic tone that resonated through the chamber like music. The alien delegates fell silent, listening. It was a song, simple, ancient, filled with wisdom. Jake looked up at the Christian being, who pulsed softly. "It is thanking us." For the first time, Jake truly understood. This wasn't just about science or survival. It was about empathy, about connection across impossible boundaries. Professor rested a clawed hand on Jake's shoulder. "You have done well, cadet. The Academy will hear of this. The Senate will hear of this." Jake swallowed hard. "I'm just glad it didn't end with me as lunch." Chuckled. "In that case, I recommend you enjoy your success, and prepare for the flood of diplomatic requests headed your way." As the lab began recording data and preparing reports that would ripple through galactic academia, Jake sat beside the van last time. He ran his hand along the smooth scales and whispered, "Thank you, big guy." The blinked once, slowly, and responded in its deep, musical voice, "Friend." And in that moment, surrounded by beings from countless worlds, Jake Jacobs realized he had not only passed his test, he had made history.